This is Dave Monk, the Prarie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And a suddenly incompetent Dave on the board also.
Oh, you're very helpful on the board. It's a nice day outside. The pansies are showing well. The vegetation is there. Erica Taylor came and helped to give the Pocket Prairie a haircut, and I removed some trees, volunteer trees, that were not usually on a prairie. We do have a prairie forest, and like unto the big grove, where you would have about 10 square mile of prairie forest, that is. And relating to the prairie, if there were fires, the forest would reduce in size a little bit. If you didn't have fires, the forest would extend, especially maples. Maples don't like fire, and if there's an era when settlers came and didn't burn the forest, then the maples increase. So that ecotone keeps moving back and forth according to the controlled burns, or in their day lightning strikes, and Indians would make use of that because they realized that after a burn the wildlife was increased. They'd even use the fire to make a horseshoe so that you could capture animals as they retreated from the fire. Sounds a little cruel in a way, but invariably the animals and the plants do better when the fire is complete. We can't do that on the Pocket Prairie, but we can remove the litter that accumulates over the years and stops the heat and light from getting into the prairie early on. So I left fairly quickly last Sunday to go to annual general dinner of CCDC, and I want to say a little bit about that. We had the opportunity to work with the Rail Banking Act. It was advertised loudly and clearly in the newspapers, and we knew its deadline. No local groups, including CCDC, were willing to fess up and buy the corridor to Danville. The corridor to Danville is interesting. I went with Kim Campbell over there yesterday, and it starts out at Urbana with a prairie between Main Street and Route 130, and then continues past Mayview Cemetery, Mount Olive Cemetery, through to Full's Elevator. Full's Elevator was intending to save the railroad bed and buy it into Urbana so that they could ship out by rail, which is getting to be an advantage because the cost of fuel is going up, and the cost of transporting grain by road has a deleterious effect on the roads as well as on the equipment doing the moving. Then you get to St. Joe, and we have a very interesting site there where drainage people, the local farmer, has decided to put a Missouri cut through the rail bed. A Missouri cut is where you come down into a swamp and go up the other side. It's assumed that bicyclists can do that, but it's not really true, because once you make that low spot, the water accumulates and you get willows and other things that make it rather an unattractive trail. So there are mounds of dirt there at the moment where two drainage corridors have been opened up, and railbed gravel has been put to one side, and there's even a planting of wheat or barley on the site, all without permission of the railroad CSX, which owned it till recently, and with CCDC, who has been involved with the fundraising, or with Forest Preserve, which has been given the designation of being in charge of the portion of the railbed that's in Champaign County. This continues on to St. Joe. The railroad goes through the node of the sigmoid curve of the old river. The river has been straightened so water will go out of the region quickly. And the bottomlands have been restored to bottomland forest, and the railbed takes a little divert to the south. That's where the road used to go to. The road used to follow the railroad. More recently, the road has been straightened, so there's a straight through St. Joe road that is not what the railroad or the adjacent interurban used to take. So we retreated out of that, and to St. Joe. On the east side of St. Joe was very good prairie, but there's been development along the north side of that road, 150, and volunteer mowing and herbiciding has taken the whole of that prairie out. It's very, very disappointing to see that, but it's part of our syndrome to have things mown or in straight lines or very formally dealt with. So at the very end of that corridor, there is some of the prairie left, and the soils will be fairly naturally prairie, but mowing will not bring you a good prairie. The Union Pacific comes through at that point, and Union Pacific does not want a trail going across it at level. So somehow we have to get a bridge over there. We looked at that, and then on to Ogden, where a tornado came through at one stage. We watched the kids on four-wheelers on a trail circuit there. Very typical. Then on to the county line, where Mr. Esworthy and others would like to see that railbed back into agriculture. It is, after all, just a bunch of weeds, but there's good prairie there. Then there's Rumpler. Then there's Route 49, I think, before you get to Pythian, with an elevator, and the interurban used to run across and service the elevator. Not typical, because interurban lines are usually fairly lightweight and not as substantial as the main line, but the interurban had a slug, which is a rail car with batteries on it, which could boost the electrification of the corridor in order to take out grain. It's pretty heavy. So that's a little part of the history. Or what I was doing was showing Kim some of the advantages of this corridor. Running through to the south is Lincoln Trail, and that has some interesting connotations too. It is labeled in quite a few places. Right near to Pythian, there are plots where the current was boosted. First current was DC, and then the second current was AC. AC is much better in the sense that DC drops its quality very quickly, and so eventually you get to Fithian, and the towns are always mown out, and that's understandable. So the Fithian depot has been saved by interested people in Fithian, and that's rather wonderful. We had quite a bit to do with it at one stage. Actually, WEFT had to do with it, because how I found out about it was being bought by a labour and industrial person named Terry Meadows. And when Terry bought it, Peter Miller told me about that, and I got hold of Terry Meadows, and for quite a while we were jointly working on the Fithian depot. It's one of those things where WEFT contributes in a broader sense, and we appreciate that. Peter started the labour hour that runs on Saturday at 11 to noon. So then we moved further to Muncie. Muncie, a little creek, Stony Creek comes in there. And so we moved south more to the Lincoln Trail so that Kim could see the Salt Fork, and it's now changed in style. It's moving over raw limestone in some cases. We went to Conkey Town, where there was a covered ridge, and where there was a race that allowed you to take water and move it along a long race and then turn a water wheel, and that would allow you to grind grain or have a sawmill. I'm not sure that they had a sawmill there, but we went there. And then to Oakwood. Just before Oakwood, there's Bronson. Bronson has a really nice prairie. It provided seed for the Vermilion County Conservation District for a reconstruction prairie there. It's a very good prairie, and Doris Westfield was responsible for doing that. Kevin Green is nearby. Kevin Green is on the county board. He teaches scuba diving, and he has a general care for the rail trail, and he watches neighbors who might just like to dig up the prairie, and if that happens, we replant the prairie and try to make a statement. And I was very pleased to see that the Jason field had been plowed and sown, but not on the right-of-way. The right-of-way is 100 feet for the main line with its heavy rail, and interurban is 37 feet light rail. Then we went to Mission Field, where you can see the drama of making coal available by shifting the overburden. It's like you had an imaginary big plow, and you plowed off the overburden and made a ditch. And so in that ditch, when it was dry, would be the coal. When you'd finished taking that out, what happens is the coal's removed and the ditch fills up with water. It may be 60 feet deep. So we were standing on the ground, probably 60, 100 feet above these furrows that are the polywogs, or near to Mission Field. So some of this early mining was deep and required pit ponies to remove the skiffs of coal. Kentucky folk came with 5-acre lots. They produced the food for the ponies, which usually stayed down under, may have gone blind, but they were treated well. And where the pit stuff, you had to keep the roof of the mine up, so you leave pillars of coal so that the whole lot won't sink in. Sometimes it does, but it's when you get to Danville, you have had geologically a situation where there was a fault, and accumulation in the Carboniferous area allowed for coal to assume. If you dig in there at the moment, you can find interesting Carboniferous area plant fossils. It doesn't last for very long. As soon as you open it up, it oxidizes and you've lost it. So you can't keep that material very easily. But still interesting to watch. We go to Gray's Crossing. There's people there who are independent and interesting. One has a cannon that is rented out to start track races and things like that. Just you get to know people for years of working with this corridor. And people plant the Christmas trees on territory they don't own, but that'll sort itself out legally in the long run. So then you go over a bridge that is 160 feet off the ground, and that has already been assigned $2 million to create a bicycle trail that's safe across it. It's a quarter-mile long over the Vermilion River and very near to Kickapoo State Park. The entrance to, or the end point, will be at Kickapoo State Park, and I suspect they'll open up a road which used to be an access to Kickapoo State Park, where before it was decided to entrance through Henning Road, which is a little further to the east. We looked at Hillary, which is the next little town behind the end of this trail, and looked to the possibility of going into Danville. Well, when we looked at this long time ago, probably 20 years before the opportunity came, we didn't know that the railroad was going to come out. It did come out, and Conrail decided that they could virtually give us the railroad bed, provided we guaranteed a bridge over Union Pacific, just east of St. Joe. Our estimate there was that it would cost $80,000, but it really didn't. It would cost more than that. You have, for those who have been out that corridor at 150, there's an S-shaped bridge that goes up and over a road bridge adjacent. It had a breakdown a few years ago. A train ran into one of the pillars, and the bridge had to be replaced. So it's a fairly new bridge. It wasn't new enough to catch the bicycle trade. If it had been in that era, it would have had some sort of track on the side to allow bicycles to go over that corridor. So this was an attractive corridor. It may not be what all bicyclists want. A good bicyclist wants to do 120 mile a day. And rail trails aren't usually quite the thing that they would want. So they don't want to fall off the side of the road when the car is passing them by 2 inches. They don't want to fall off into a 6-inch drop. They need the roads accessible. If you are going to travel between San Diego and Florida, you're going to be on roads most of the time. And so the road between Urbana and St. Joe is due to parallel development. And at least some bicycles will still be on 150. The rail trail will have more of a all-terrain vehicle use and people moving between small towns and the like. So it's a parallel corridor. It's helpful in that Illinois 74 is the federal highway is fairly crowded, and 150 is getting more and more traffic. And it's a two-lane road, and there's room in the IDOT right-of-way to expand it a little bit and make it a little bit better. We're hoping like crazy that they don't plant roadside plants that screw up the prairie. Now, come back to Sunday. We were glad to be recognized as Heartland Pathways and what we did to take the risk of saying that we would buy this corridor. We worked with the Rail Banking Act, which was trying to save railroad beds, so they had a deal with bicyclists to the bicyclists, if they bought the bed, the Rail Banking Act was not going to buy the bed. If they bought the bed, they would provide money. They would, for enhancement, it's called enhancement money. They would save the bridges, like the quarter-mile bridge over the Vermilion, and they would quiet the titles so no one could dig up the rail bed for agriculture. And that's a great temptation. After the CCDC dinner, we went over to Clinton and checked out some invasion of the land there. And it's interesting that the rail bed there that has been dug up in an untoward manner over warranty deed titles was planted to corn only on that spot. The adjacent field was either too wet, or it was probably too wet to do it, but on our right-of-way, the corn is already planted. We haven't had that sort of problem on the way to Danville. A little bit of invasion from side to side, but still keeps the corridor intact. A little bit of drainage problem, but we made this move to guarantee to buy, and amongst others, we went to CCDC, Champaign County Design and Conservation Foundation, to raise money to meet the cost of the bridge across Union Pacific. That inspired CCDC to be very interested in this. This was an excellent project. Why they didn't get involved before the fact, I don't know, but the agencies around the community were told to check out this opportunity, but no one was prepared to do it. So Heartland Pathways did it. And then CCDC decided they wanted to do the developmental work, or the fundraising. Not so much the developmental work, it's fundraising. And there was agreement that that could happen. We'd already bought 33 miles of railroad bed to the west, and that had we'd paid for that, and so we didn't think we'd have any problem raising the finance. But this was kind of a takeover, and in good spirit, and we accepted that, but had a handshake agreement that Heartland Pathways would be part of the act. Well, that didn't happen, and we were a little sad about that. It was a long time ago. It was 1998 or something in there, 96, and part of the lack of recognition of where we were involved is because populations change. There's some people who don't even know what started this or where it started. But it's well documented, and it's well documented that we had a handshake agreement to be part of this. CCDC was told, and we were told by Conrail, that if you do this, you have to do it quickly because it will otherwise be sold to a major railroad company, probably CSX. Well, CCDC didn't manage to get the money quick enough, so we lost more or less a gift of a railroad bed. CSX bought it, and it's now taken best part of 20 years to make an agreement with CSX. CSX immediately wanted an arm and a leg for the corridor, and there's been a back and forth there. So the Forest Preserve has put in $600,000. The Vermilion County has put in $600,000 to make $120,000, and then more or less a $2 million request has been met with a tax exemption. So CSX still has the advantage of being able to come back in if it wants to. That's the nature of the Rail Banking Act. And so money has been raised and money is being raised. We hope not to get in the way, but we do hope that some of the aims that were in our objective will be maintained. One of those aims is Prarie.
Quick question. So the original owner wasn't planning to actually use the rail bed for trains and was willing to practically hand you for just a pittance. Then along comes CSX, and they didn't use it for trains either. So the entire purpose for CSX buying it was so that they could turn around and try and sell it for even more money?
That may have been so, but the railroads do buy up these corridors because they don't exactly know what they're doing with railroads. They, in the east and the west, they've organized their traffic, but it's not been easy when you're in the Midwest and you don't know. You've got a hub in Chicago and a hub in Memphis. How do you handle the business from Danville to Champaign, from Bloomington to Champaign? Where do you get the outlets and things? So they buy it in a speculation. And so it may be to make money, but not usually. It's to make sense. And the connection there is for them between Bloomington and Indianapolis, because there's a fast line that goes from Chicago to Bloomington to St. Louis. So you have a rail connection. So you can, if you're thinking of railroads, you're thinking in terms of that sort of thing happening. So the return to rail mightn't happen for 200 years, but we're looking in that sort of term. So at the meeting on Saturday, after various people had looked at archives and recognized that we did have an involvement, we were recognized, and that was very pleasing, because if you have done this work in the outset, people have had to support you to do this, and we need to be able to let them know that we were involved. The meeting adjourned to the area between Main Street and Route 130 to dedicate a tree to turn the first shovel. And that really bothered me, because this was one of our best prairies until Walmart came and the prairie was kind of disturbed. But we still have the soil. But to plant trees on it was more than I could understand, because and I could understand it in the sense that people don't know about prairie and what it's our local gene pool, our local habitat, our bacteria and fungi and soil type. But that was the dedication. So at the moment, CCDC is angling to get the matching money, because many of these monies that come to this trail require a certain amount of matching money. Like the Rail Banking Act won't buy the railroad bed. That's been satisfied at the moment, but it's going to cost $2 million to put a trail over the bridge at Danville. It's going to cost to go through St. Joe. There's a lot of interest in it, and I think it will work. And there's adjunct space to the 5 miles to the north and 5 miles to the south that is interesting, and we hope that it will also have a parallel road that can be bicycled by people who are wanting to do speed bicycling, and those speeds will connect to other major corridors across the country. For instance, we've had friends ride from San Diego to Florida and take 45 days doing it. But you could take 80 days doing it. You could take a trip to some of these other places that would provide interest. So that's where we are with CCDC and some well-earned documentation and recognition of our initial role. And we thank those people who helped us to do that. We'll continue to be interested in, especially interested in the prairie, and I almost like to see the trees not remain on the area between Main Street and Route 130, just because it's such a good little prairie, and in its day it was one of the better remnant prairies on that whole corridor. And again, recent people haven't seen it that way. They've only seen it as a developed area, but the elements are there. It's near to Weaver Park. It's near to the area of the rail yards. It's near to a bunch of other things that would make a different place a good starting point for a trail. Don't have to give up a little piece of prairie. And I can hear it right now, but Dave, it's such a little piece of prairie. But when you're down to 1 square mile of decent prairie in the state that was 2/3 prairie, you cherish that. You don't give it away or dump a building on it or trees on it. So there's my rant for the moment. At the same time, we've been talking to Monticello. Monticello has a Farnham group, and it's investigating trails, and they have some of the similar problems. We bought railroad bed there, 1988, a long time ago. At that time, did the local communities, including Monticello, want to buy or help us buy? No. But now it's more attractive to do this. There's more recognition of bicycles, and it's more possible to do it. So we've got one good trail that Monticello has put in, and that is being extended. It goes across the Sangamon River. It's really a nice corridor. The next question is, can we put 4 miles of trail to Armenia, where we're wanting to save an elevator? Well, my answer is, you've got Route 72 that's taken most of the traffic off old 47. And you want to get into Decatur, you want to get from Decatur to Monticello to Danville, then you have to be using roads. This is a fairly quiet road, and sure, some people do 70 miles an hour down the road. But when you designate trails, you put up signs to alert the public that they're going to have bicycle traffic on these lines. At the moment, we are not sure whether Monticello is committed fully to the prairie that's adjacent to the railbed, on the railbed. So we're wanting to just put a 4-foot wide trail going one direction to Armenia and then back into Allerton Park and around about. So I think it was a shock to the planners who are being paid to prepare a bicycle way, to prepare a master plan, which is very needed if we want to get grant money. They're thinking mainly of local traffic. Could we have an 8-foot wide trail of concrete? My feeling is no, because at the moment I'm seeing 8-foot wide trail. One of the biggest costs of putting in a trail are to surveil it so the trestles don't get burned, so the prairie doesn't get ruined by four-wheelers, so the farmers don't come up on the side and crib into the prairie. I don't see that sort of surveillance yet, and I don't see the people involved wanting to be interested in the delicacy of a prairie and its 100 species of broadleaves and 6 grasses. We also have to face the fact that we have autumn olives on that corridor, a lot of trees, and they don't belong on the prairie. They've been brought in by the Department of Conservation years ago to provide feed for birds. So we have to get rid of those. And we've had a good example of that on Route 45, where we had Ameren help us by mowing the trees down, and now we have to figure out how to keep the trees from growing again. They will shoot, or there will be 1 million seeds in there that will take off. So this is heavy-duty work, and so we'll need volunteers to do that for years ahead. We haven't heard from the university about preserving the icon of a wooden elevator. We'd like that to happen. Don't want to see the house at Armenia burned down. We would like to see it restored, and we'd like to see a visitor center there. So we spent time with Farnham Group talking about these sorts of things, and I found that to be rather pleasing. They have a public action, public presentation opportunity on the 27th of May, I think it is, and it's your opportunity to put your oar in the water and say what you would like as a trail. Do you want an 8-foot concrete corridor to Armenia, or do you want the prairie? Do you want the rattlesnakes and other rare plants and animals to survive? If so, there has to be some recognition of the value of that habitat. Okay. I wanted to say thank you to David, who's been organizing archivists. There were three archivists here yesterday, and they're looking for a grant, an NEH Preps grant. That's that national. What is that? NEH. Okay.
I actually don't know myself, but it's part of the federal government, and they give out money for things. And yes, there are these 3 grad students in the grad school for library and information sciences who, as part of a class project, came to WEFT and said, "Hey, we'd like to archive WEFT." And we laughed and said, "Okay, let's take you upstairs." And we showed them a wall of reel-to-reel tapes, and they said, "Oh, goody!" And we showed them the huge piles of back when WEFT had the WEFT review a long time ago. This is fantastic, they said. And so, yes, as you say, they're putting together this proposal that they're going to submit to some federal, organization. And if the money comes through, then they apparently will be employed to follow through on what they're talking about. They're going to archive WEFT, just as I understand Jack Brighton, I believe, is the person who's kind of in charge of doing that sort of thing at WILL.
Yes, and it's been interesting that similar archivists have been working with ERES and Heartland Pathways next door. So I gave them my cell phone, not my cell phone, my hard drive, and they pulled information that we've been taking in this booth. They couldn't take all because each of our programs for 1 hour takes 3 gigabytes. And they didn't have that capacity on their computers, but they've sampled this as good archivists do. They sort of know what they want to look for. And it was very interesting for me to talk to Dave Thoms and talk about the Labour Hour and the Fithian elevator, not elevator, the depot, the station. And to know that WEFT has been involved in that particular piece of community action. And I think that's what they're after, is this historical preservation. And so I was very pleased to see that underway, and 3 people working very seriously with what they'd brought down from upstairs. They did have a folder with all the WEFT reviews in it.
Yes, exactly. It was remarkable to watch them out in the Great Hall because they each had their own job. One of them was scanning in documents. When there was no digital version of it, they were simply taking the documents and making digital copies of it that way. One of them, I'm not quite sure what the other 2 specifically were doing, but they were working through all of our numbers. I said to one of them, you be careful here. If you open those folders, that's mostly numbers. And she was like giddy. Say, oh, goody, this is apparently her purpose is to take numbers and go through them to figure out what WEFT's income has been, what our outgo has been, and how to use those numbers to increase the chance that we'll get these grants. And each of them seem to have their... I understand in the old days, you actually needed several people to fly an airplane. These days, I gather they pretty much fly themselves. But it kind of had that feeling. The 3 of them were coordinating so closely that they each had their own distinct part, and all 3 of them were necessary to get this grant finished. And it was really great. I got to spend about an hour, maybe even an hour and a half one afternoon last week. Since I've been here it's something like 20 years and they're kind of new to the place, I got to fill in some of the names, the people who were involved in creating La Voz Latina, for example, on a Saturday afternoon, and the connection between WEFT and an African Studies program on campus, as a matter of fact, for the African program that we had. And so, yeah, that was the fun that I got to do, was to be the institutional memory for them, to go back and we discovered a great use for the grid that we have on the back of our T-shirts. I couldn't remember the hours for the Lavos show, and I realized I was wearing a WEFT T-shirt from the era, and I just turned around and said, where does it say Latin music there? So there you have, our T-shirts themselves are useful for archival purposes.
I thought it was very good, and I really wish them the best. I have a few rants here. One is that it's the end of the semester, and things just get thrown out. These were in the garbage can, so it seems to me to be a functional piece of equipment.
Dave is holding on to a racquetball racket.
And there are 2 of them. So, and then in the corner here, we have a mower that was put in the dumpster, and I'm not sure yet. I haven't taken it. It may need a new battery or something, but even if it's just for steel, it shouldn't be thrown in the dumpster. So as you go around in the near future, go dumpster diving. If you're finding a good dumpster, take a couple of cans, put a board across the thing so you can get high enough to dive into the dumpster and pull out goodies like functional computers or things that people feel that they can go to a job in California and they can buy it cheaper than they can transport it across the country. But the stuff that is going into our dumpsters is really quite serious.
If
let me add, please do not put liquid in the dumpster. We have a huge mess of stuff outside that is from putting in waste cooking oil into the dumpster in a container. But when you put that sort of container into a dumpster, it usually breaks apart when other stuff is put on it. So that I wanted to say something about. On your sheet, I have one other comment, and I forgot what it was. You're right underneath the heading.
Oh, well done.
Oh, yes. Well, I did say something about Weldon, so that's okay. But if we want trails and interesting things to happen, we have to have volunteers. Yesterday was a sale of prairie plants by Grand Prairie Friends, and they will come again. I think it's the 17th. They will be working with the sale of prairie. This is a major sale for them. It probably earns them about $3,000 a year. It allows them to hire interns that work with the prairie. So it's rather important. And if you see them at the common market selling leftover prairie plants, then please get involved. Put a little prairie plant in your front yard. Remember that, unfortunately, prairie plants do not like shade. They like full sunlight, so please work with them on that basis. And if you have a perennial plant shaded, it will turn into an annual plant and die. So now, what else did we have here?
Here's a question for you. Every spring, our house is invaded by ants. We can do our best to not put food where, just leave food laying out and things like that, but they just, they just invade. Do you happen to know of a civil way, a humane way to encourage them to mind their own business and go enjoy the outdoors? Because it's nice out there.
Well, that's very interesting. We have a problem with herbicides and whatnot. These ants are intriguing. I have been reading Roger Ebert's memoirs, and as a child, he would have his nose down on ants and watching what they do. And sometimes they're in little colonies, and then they compete with each other. They're really, really intriguing, and they do a lot of turning over of the soil worldwide. And we should appreciate ants. Even some of the chemicals that provide the formic acids and the like are gotten from those creatures. That means there's a gene pool. So we have to respect these little ants. But I know what you're saying. I took an aluminum plate out of the dumpster and had a little bit of food left on it, and I put it inside my building, and very shortly it was black with ants. And I don't know that you can do too much about it. At the moment, the herbicide people do something about it. They have an herbicide. Kim Campbell has a sheet which shows how much power there is in some of the current herbicides. So if you go down the list, some of the herbicides we're using now are 50 times more powerful than what we had in the past. So when you use them, you abuse every other creature that is. And that's very, very difficult. No, I don't really have a good answer for those little black creatures that I think you're talking about. And I think what I want you to do, too, is to go down to South 45 and walk along the prairie. We don't have a path for you. We have a little road that goes in. It was a road that goes into the cruise house. But if you can walk along the corridor, the current recommendation is that you don't have to be doing it in an alligator fashion. You don't have to have a concrete path. You move through the prairie like you're a buffalo, and you might be anywhere and everywhere, but that will be a delightful prairie, and it'll be so much better now that it's been mown. So I would hope some of you would go down to South Neal Street and go into that little road and park near to the railroad line, not too near, or you'll get the railroad detectives will come and visit you. But see what you can find. If you're in doubt about a plant, start looking at little booklets that tell you about those plants and how they meld with each other. Some plants, like hoary puccoon, we don't quite know how to grow it in an unnatural setting because we don't know what its partnerships are with bacteria or fungi or ants too. Ants often pollinate. So just walking that corridor will help to preserve it. And there's a second corridor that you should know about, and not too many people do. It's at Lake Park. It's just north of Lake Park, and it took a lot of the prairie that was on the road that was Route 45. Originally, that road was a 2-lane road, then it was a 3-lane road, and then it was a 5-lane road. And the prairie that was growing in what is now the middle lane, we brought out and put onto the prairie between the road and the railroad line. Well, some of that we got a grant, and we moved it with tandem truck, about the top 10 inches, put it into tandem truck, and took it around to a field owned by Dick Burwash at the time. It's now owned by Lake Park. But there's an excellent little prairie there. We had to work with it. When you dump from a tandem truck, it tends to dump your prairie upside down. So you then have to have a front end loader or something. You can't lift heavy soil. You can't lift heavy sod. So you have to lift that sod, turn it over before it rots. You get a few days before it dies. That's how you kill a prairie, is to plow it. So we have a few weeds that go with the railroad right away, but that little prairie has a trail around it. We have an argument at the moment in that area because Lake Park has given its landscape physical plant people a 5-foot mower, which takes 1 foot of prairie out. And you know, when you have about a mile of trails, that's taking out a lot of prairie that we spent a lot of time saving. So how do you next go to Lake Park and say, excuse us, but can you use a 4-foot mower to do this? 5 foot is just enough for most cars can use it. So then you expect to have 4-wheeled vehicles and others using it late at night or running over it. So we have to do that sort of thing. I still am putting a few things out in the street. The rabbits haven't found us this year yet. So I've been able to grow some things that I haven't been able to grow before. So violas and the like are growing quite well. The squirrels tend to like them some, and the rabbits certainly like them. But I've nestled them up against the WEFT front door and our front door next door, mainly because the squirrels are a little less likely to invade stuff that's right close to humans. If they need their privacy too, or their safety. So that is working well. But I think we got 3 minutes. I think that's time to say this has been Dave Monk, your Prarie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.